my clan. On my mother's side, come from the Loon. And some of the teaching says that if I'm from that Loon clan, supposedly looking after the internal affairs of the people. And on my father's side, I'm on the elk people. And responsibilities, that's great gentleness. Looking at those kinds of ideas when I see them, and asking myself, where is this coming from? Who is doing this teaching? But what I have done, a great deal of what my knowledge is based upon is from my life experience and the way that I've been guided by the people at home. Take mixing and it's like saying Canada. People of Canada have been teaching me. When I look at the community at home, I'm going back to some of the concepts, the way that we speak today about where it is that we are. When I say I'm from Sudbury, Ontario, Sudbury is saying something about a particular point. Ontario is saying something about a particular space. But internally within the state called Canada. So at home, I share with people. I say, I take mixing and I keep this nation. And then Sakwa. No. Coming from that particular place. Let's say coming from Sudbury. I'm not acknowledging the idea that there's an additional subdivision of Ontario in between. Breaks up the state of Canada into blocks, provinces, and into towns and cities. So at home, the way that was shared with me was traveling with my mother, going into the city here, then returning home. He said, I want to buy a ticket to Wasapa. Thinking they were looking at her. We don't go to Wasapa. I don't know where it is. Whoa. I want to buy a ticket to Naughton. Naughton's inside my home. Things like racial preference. She was using that moment to teach me something about who I am, where it is that I'm living. It's important for me to come to know. That's what's showing me. So at home, so within our last century or so time, we've moved our community site. We were centered at a place where we now have our central wigwam. sacred fire site on the shore of Picnic. And we said, we come from a Tikmikshing. Tikmikshing is inside the Tikmikshing Ender. So the community, territorial space. I'm working with youth and trying to get into the subject of looking at Canada today to say that I look at the say I come from a Whitefish Lake, I come from a Tikmikshing. Getting them to think more intimately about this idea of origin. You can see separated in my backyard. Recall years back going to school and within the city, and people were talking about the size of their lot. My lot is 70 feet by 100 feet. Ooh, small. And my lot is 7 miles by 10 miles. The size of my lot. Strange.
Your lot's in my lot.
How did that happen? I have the place to view, but I'm considered to be more poor. Always, and I'm quite rich. You don't see it in terms of my appearance, but I own Canada. Look at me kind of strange again. But we're hearing that native Canada is owned by somebody. So I'm going to school to learn English, the English language. One of my principal purposes is to find why I am here. My school at home got shut down. We could not get good teachers. The teachers were hard to come by, that were willing to come into the First Nation community and live and see the place as a place of employment. Couldn't identify with it at the time. Yes, telling me that they were racist. Didn't understand, couldn't relate to it, nothing. Foreign to me. Thoughts. So I always saw myself as a person of a good sound foundations. Always had a sense of, I guess you'd say, a good identity. I was viewed as an economic, never questioned. How did I keep people quiet? Because that's what I lived. And my parents, I used to think that they were poorly educated people, but they told me they never had gone to school in the city or the town. They've never been inside a building called a school. At least from what the school was about. Bodies for our world. Same with my parents. Were Anishinaabe. They had never been to residential school. They had never been into institutions that were external learning. We were solemnly grounded in ceremony, solemnly grounded in how we lived for years before the time that we came into contact with the European nations. We start to see the pressure from the European nations wanting to change the way that we are living. And for a time, I lived primarily in the world of being Anishinaabe. The first 4 years of my life. For 3 years, from the age of 4 till about the age of 7, I ended up in hospital because of tuberculosis. And during that time, I was primarily living in isolation. And during that time, I remember the anxiety, pressure of being lonely. I cried and cried and cried until I could cry no more, feeling inside when you sleep. And I lost understanding about that I had a mom, I had a family, I had a father, three siblings. All those relationships were silenced during that 3-year time frame while I was in the hospital. And when I was released from the hospital to go back home, I thought I had to be born a second time. During that second time of being born, I was dropped into that world of being weak, learning a different culture, learning a different group, learning a different places. Kind of a strange event. So this morning, I was talking with the group. I'm saying to them, my name is Art Petahtegoose. I stepped on you this year. There's a line here that runs through your center, puts a boundary on the road. When I step on this side here, I'm in the world that you're living in now. Which economic community, modern world science and perceptions and being, which is good. When I step over to the other side, I go back into my world of English travel. And a lot of the boundaries that come to this side disappear. Especially those ones which relate to how I see myself. This side, I'm looking at my physical body and shape and packaging. When I go to this side, that all becomes now I'm at the spiritual level. Boundary suddenly comes. And it's in living this side that we see a lot of the behavior that we speak about around it. You're not looking at physical boundary limitations. And that becomes more evident in language today. I speak about, say that the language that are used are learning. Nice that we can converse in this modern context. A lot of the language that comes from that side of the world is quite strongly grounded in negative energy, negative foundations. Classic example is the use of that F word. Seems to be spoken everywhere. And in my home, my parents impressed upon me. Those words that are coming from that kind of place won't even allow them to become part of the vocabulary. Don't bring them home and make them new. Religion tries to address that. But at home it was spiritual grounding, say that we don't use that to define God. Don't even bring it. When I would hear my mom and dad talk, I would never hear that kind of language. It just wasn't in our home. My dad hit his hand and said, ouch, or some kind of a term. It's not used all the words anyway. He always impressed upon people that came to our house, came to live with us, that they were not speakers. And you're in my home, you're in the home of the Creator. Be mindful of it. That's the kind of living That's the kind of grounding that our people were immersed in our culture. And that's what was so profound by Europeans when they came into contact with our people, that we witnessed and recorded that. But we've lost a lot of those methods that we were living being carried into this modern world. A lot of that was removed through our children being placed in residential schools, day schools, institutions, hospitals, just outside going into the external world. Exposure to all kinds of variety and change. All of that began to be picked up and then replacing our economic roots. Today we talk about something. If we go around at home, we take a look at how we have achieved. Take a look at all the huge toys that we have bought. Small ones, big ones, motorboats, all the toys that we can use because we bought something in the big backyard, which is lakes that are open. It's cut off and separated from being used quite extensively. We've come through a lot of change. And now we're seeing that we want to go back and connect with our mother's foundations. We're finding a challenge to those that are doing that. So when we this morning when I was sharing with people, that we took some steps to provide for some security that we are needing. That's the capacity to self-define. How has the treaty that we have made make that possible? Because it's a foundation document. But during the time I was referencing, let's show you this lead up to 1763. But this one here, 1763. That's the emergence of this, how can we call it? Royal Proclamation. This one here took a copy out from the United States. Down in the United States, there's a component of the document that was dropped. So I'm having to think about that. But in that 1763 time frame, there was an event of a war that was being waged in Europe. It was being carried here to North America, and our people were being drawn into it. Some of our people participated. And this is what when Elder Peter, what you said, came here to Sudbury and then to Cross Ontario and then started to travel, to share some of the stories about what they were keeping. They talk about leaving the corridor of Montreal in that space because they were threatened by ideas relating to conscription. Conscription meaning that they were coming into the community and taking the most capable people, those most physically able, and they were placing them in the armies of Europe. France was doing this, Britain was doing this. These are primary contexts we were connecting with. So in that 1759 time frame, which we may have looked at in Canadian history record, talk about General Montcalm and General Wolfe. General Montcalm lost the battle on the battlefield of Quebec. But over in Europe, 1763. England became the Europe. France, the loser. And war is a very dangerous kind of activity in which to be engaged. Because the loser is punished. What happened to France was all the belongings that they had opened up here in North America suddenly lost. Everything that they had put here and opened was put into a big waste basket and was collectively thrown in. The whole package was picked up and given to Britain. Britain became the owner over the colonial interests. They took ownership of the people, objects. They treated them like this. That's a sad outcome. But it changed the presence of the French people in North America. And we don't think about that as these sometimes. But the part relating to the silencing all ideas around rights. And in that articles of capitulation, the treaty was signed in Europe, go back to peaceful living arrangements. Part of the condition was that understanding the people in French origin, you can continue to keep your language, you can continue to keep your law, you can continue to live by your practices. And that became contained within the British North America conditions. Yes. Various with the rest of the country. But in there, you start taking a look at what happened with us, happened to us as Indigenous nations, the Danish Nordic. We go back and look at that and say, yes, you conquered France, but you didn't conquer us. So we look at the content of the treaty. Part here, there's a transcribing treaty. When we sit down with Canada, we ask them questions. Where in the treaty does it say I give up my right to self-government? There's nothing in there to extinguish that right. Where does it say that I give up my right to keep my language? Nothing there to silence it. Where does it say I extinguish my history about by my long tie with the land? Again, silence. Where does it say they give up the right to call myself a Anishinaabe? So those four items which we asked. Contact. Today they're extremely significant. In 2017, Canada was asked and invited, let's say, the host, to appear before the third committee over in Europe. The third committee is a third panel. They're an international court, an international body, and it's a body that's centered in the United Nations, the Charter of the United Nations, binding the nations of the earth work together to form relationships of living. And the treaty is coming from that kind of an understanding. The treaty defines relationships between nations. So during that 1978 time frame, here Trudeau was saying, nations do not make treaties with their people. So they were wanting to distinguish silence treaties that unify. 1969, we made that attempt. Sorry, but you're stepping outside of the jurisdiction. You don't have those things. So as a person who's witnessing these kinds of events and seeing them and looking at them, 1763, 1764. When my father was invited into the nations of Ireland, when Britain went to war, 2014, 1914, 1939, a call was made to enlist. But that enlistment and call on conscription forces going didn't apply to us. So when my father went out to join, I was having a talk with him. I asked him, what made you enlist? Why did you go? And it wasn't required that you do so. Oh, you don't know anything about us. 1763, a proclamation was issued. Great Britain, in becoming the dominant power of the world, prepared this document and submitted it globally. So copies of that came to our communities, to our people. And they looked at it. But Britain was sending a message to the world, very much like the United States and Russia believe today. Britain became the dominant military power of the days. And they let people know it by issuing this proclamation. Inside that proclamation, it makes threats. It says, I'm going to expand globally. I'm going to expand into North America. And if there's any objection, then you had better be prepared to go to war with me. That's the kind of threat that's in the document. So our people looked at it and said, it's nice that you say things, but you just defeated France, but you didn't defeat me. So we decided to act. And this is what Pontiac did during that time. Started to send messages to Britain that we're not going to become victim to you. We're going to get rid of you from North America. But he started to take steps to do that by burning the forts that they were beginning to open up in Great Lakes areas. Our people were going down there to participate in doing that work. Dangerous work. They saw it as being needed to protect our interests. They knew that Britain was weak because our people were going there to form their armies. They were in that good relationship with us to keep themselves funded. They were rapidly changing and growing. The 7 years of war that they had just come through considerably weakened. And we knew that. They were living on a little island in the middle of the Atlantic. Our was larger than the Sea of France. We had military allies fighting with us. He said, we're going to rally our armies. We're going to rally our armies. Wow. You saw what he did with the French people. We're not going to allow ourselves to do that. We took those kinds of actions to protect our interests. So that kind of a story, that kind of, okay, we're not well informed about. But at home, because all the people there participating. That story. Evil. But that's how I learned. My father, generation 4 people, we've always had participation in the political life of our nation. So my father reminded me, 1763, but this one here, 1764. We did 2 things. We made 2 treaties. One before. We're documenting these because we have a plan that's going to forward to Canada. So we're going back into the history to record all our participation in events to bring us to where we are today. So in this 1600 timeframe, we were fighting among ourselves in North America here as Indigenous nations, Indigenous peoples, we were there in conflicts. But in that period, 1600, 1700, we start to see this one emerging. Great peace of Montreal, last place where we gathered to reinforce those foundations. But there we talk about the concepts and the ideas, the dish with one spoon. Dish with one spoon referencing that there's only one earth. And all peoples of the globe take their life from that one earth. So we made this agreement among ourselves that we would, rather than go to war, we would approach one another with our bundles, sacred items. Say that when you go into a community, you wear that belt, emblems of it, pictures of it. We see that in a lot of our regalia theater palace. People picking up these images and putting them on. But those images say something about your intention, about who it is that you are. I'm a person who live by sacred law for people. And inside, we have our language. This is the one I address with people quite frequently. Say that when we describe the birth of a child, we relate to the term Abanoji. Abanoji is saying something about my origin, where you see that. The Ah says on spirit and creation. The Bear says, I've been put into this physical body and form. I'm a living person. Ujia says that I am sacred and I have capacities by being able to speak, dance, walk, sing. Those kinds of ideas are continuing to wood. See this one, that's everyone's. Everyone was best classes for healthy and body. And it's our responsibility to keep them intact, to respect them, to nurture them, provide them with the teaching. It's going to help them with life. So our ceremonies are contain this kind of knowledge. And this morning, that's what I was showing. The way that I learned to open a sweat lodge and to build a sweat lodge, I do that for myself. I participated in living like that with my father. As he became my primary teacher. This kind of a knowledge which I didn't think he was having. But he was never asked by me to teach me. As I got older, I started to ask more questions about how to live before contact with Europeans. And he pointed out to me with a shoe. Began to take the language apart. Ideas. But he knew that I couldn't speak English, not him. I was speaking in English, but that's how I became assimilated with that. I had to talk. Really relive and reconnect with English Arabic. Walk through that. My mom. She was teaching me. I see that she was not educated. They didn't go to school, European school, you know, kindergarten. These are all stupid people. Influenced by the outside thought, leaving that and seeing that. Yeah, the people about anything concerned. I had to put all that arbitrary and talk about the rule. And it was the behavior of my mom, whom I asking her questions. She began to show me, guide me. So these items that I'm carrying today, I use. And so I had, this one is new, 10 years, it looks old. This one is 14,000 years, 15,000 years, quite old. It comes from our community or backyard. So it's reminders about time we have been here. So we're going back over here, Lion language people, historical context. We are able to speak to those. So in 2017, Canada was asked to go and stand before this third body to speak about these items. The interrogator, investigator, was Britain. Canada asked, Great Britain asked Canada, please show us the documents which give you title to the land. I want you to bring those before us. Not before court. Canada, quite embarrassing. Okay, John, I want to talk to you. Britain asked another question. Please, Canada, tell me, what is your language? Again, in Canada, silence. No language. Because Britain is the mother of English. You ask them, oh, where's your language coming from? So Canada has no language. So stop the English. But in terms of defining essence of a nation, it can't satisfy the conditions. We can. And it says, who are your people? Canada, please tell me, who are your people? All the difference. Every last one. All the difference. So we look at that. Canada wants to call itself a nation. It's can't satisfy the conditions. Show us your long contact through history in ties with that land. Again, it cannot be that. So 4 components essential for definition of being a nation. Canada cannot supply qualify. So Canada is a state, not a nation. Canada has come into being through the British North America Act. So we remind Canada and question them about what it's doing. So under Section 91, Section 92, when you go back and look at the British North America Act, you look at Canada Act today, we asked about they're asserting jurisdiction over us as people. Ask where does that authority come from? Because in the treaty that we have made, that is not contained. For this Royal Proclamation was questioned about whether or not it's law. So in 1951, when that Indian Act was altered to open the door so that we could bring claim against Canada for its infractions, Frank Calder on the West Coast, in the front of that mine, against claim forward. And in 1973, something like that, 20 years after, 50 years after, hearing was held in Ottawa. And one of the questions they asked is that Royal Proclamation still valid law in Canada? The court said yes. So inside this Royal Proclamation, it starts talking about the idea of an agreement, treaty. It says that Canada, in going on to that land, it's having to first enter into the making of a treaty with the Indigenous peoples. So in British Columbia, where there are no treaties, they have to go there and make that request. But it doesn't come from Canada. It's initiated by the First Nation people. And that's what the law dictates. The request must come from the First Nation people to make the treaty. Canada cannot go and walk on the land and try to make claim. All those images that we see in Facebook and other technology, they sent a little message back to them. It's kind of a requirement. Most of it, let's talk there for 5 minutes. Anyways, somebody's watching me very close. think about that. At home, elders have asked me on occasion, are you afraid of being shot? The way that you talk, people make and it could happen. Somebody. In a modern world today, climate that we see, people going to schools for the children. So I am mindful that this can result. My responsibility, I have to live up to those because that's my work. It's a responsibility of my time. Also, this is the outside route. Rage caused by all these kinds of options. We are thinking about the teaching that we are receiving. Who is teaching you? Who's guiding you? So these ones, which are given to me as gifts by my teachers that have been working with me. This one was shared with me by our non-walk student. Asked me to help me on a couple of times. He came over and looked up to me. Look on me. We thank you. Understood. I had good teachers. So in this 1700 time frame over here, great piece that we made, that issue on stone. The core of that is saying is needed, but today by the modern world. You look at the Ukraine, the violence, and tragedy that's going on there. It would be nice if we have our teaching. There's a need to share the world. So it's that kind of an understanding about the need to share globally with nations of the world that moved all people into making treaties of free trade. So in 1764, in that year, we did two things. The first was that as nations in occupying Turtle Island, talk about our inherent right, our Aboriginal right, our Indigenous rights, we protected those. So in being born into North America, I'm not locked into a little lot, but that's 7 miles by 700 feet by 7 feet by. Little house that's 15 by 15. I have this gift that has been given to me for being mobile. So I can go and live in British Columbia, or I can live down in and by my Aboriginal inheritance, I have the right to go and put a lot here. Canadian freedom. Being Aboriginal, the economic, I know, because I protected that interest. This is, I just recently was at a conference here in Sudbury last week, speaking with the chief to say that inherent right, we protected that for our Indigenous nations. 1764, the 24 nation covenant we made, that's what it speaks about. Those nations, all nations across Turtle Island, we sent runners up to visit their communities and invite them to this treaty gathering, this discussion that occurred in Niagara Falls. So we have to do something because we're the nation of Europe where Great Britain wants to make treaty with us. I can't speak collectively for everyone. You have to speak for people. What is it that you want to protect? That's what happened. French people, in terms of all their interests, are trying to put it in Britain, cutting them off with all their guns. We don't want that to happen to us, or we can stop it. And it's true the understanding of treaty. Treaty is about bringing international nations together, international forms, international bodies, to form living, not conflict. And contracts, they can be broken. Treaties are much more. We talk about things. In case our circumstance, and say 1764, the covenant we made is inviolable, meaning that it cannot be broken by one. Inviolable, and it's sacrosanct. Sacrosanct meaning that it's secret. Another power that we understand is present, that is here with us. We acknowledge the presence of this kind of a being in spirit that watches what we do, that has given us life, and has given us a home in which to live. So in 1764, we took care of those kinds of matters by coming together as nations, and we formed this covenant, the 24 Nation Agreement. And the 24 Nation Agreement, we said we will treat one another as though we are all family, as though brother and sister, as though husband and wife. And the interest which I carry here at the Tikmekshing, I'm able to exercise if I go out to British Columbia and live there. But there's a requirement in my taking that step. I must go and visit the home community of those people and get from them their permission to take that step. You just go there and just build without that getting that permission. That's theft, that's stealing. We don't do that. That's what that 1760, 1700 great peace speaks about. There's one bowl, one dish, one spoon. We all feed from the same place, but when we take food, it's at the request of the person that's having it. I ask them to share with me. That's inside those foundation teachings that we carry in our ceremonies. So at home, I was working with Susan. She came over to have some chat with me. We talked about the little lodge that I did. teachings from our ancestors being carried. On the one side, you say, teaching from inside you was the elevations of dimension. And then these first two talk about being kind as a social contract, sharing only with people, care, look after those that cannot make decisions for themselves, like elderly people, infant children, provide nurturing to them, make sure that they're going to be well. And then courage and health and the ability to do that. Social contract in terms of the community. Then in concert with that, the part was ad hoc teachings. But the one which I'm saying lately, missing. Currently, it isn't there. 7 grandfathers. In my view, there's 8. Because that's how we've been guided. That's what we've been living. We're bringing back into form the justice component. And across our communities, we don't see the justice component being present. That was a big part of our discussion last week with the chiefs, especially with the police. The justice has to be clear so that it's easy to enforce. If it's difficult to enforce, then maybe that law, you should not create it. Because it's going to cause too much grayness in your behaviors. The clarity of justice will become difficult to capture. People want to do that. But inside here, qualities, inside this lodge, with the core in there, fire, where we gather, we sit in council around this fire to talk. Yeah, but when we talk, there's an emergence of truth that comes forward, it comes out from that we are seeking, helps us to guide, shift in our behaviors. When I don't gather like that, then I end up working alone. My own direction may not be well for the people. Because I haven't asked from them what they would like. What should I be doing? Because I may be in contradiction. So in our lodges, we used to gather like this at home in the evening hours. We used to light up that fire. And we used to visit with one another quite regularly and have discussions about care of the community and the families. All that was a short through contact and pressures from colonization and assimilation. So we're having to go back and open up some of those channels again. And it's difficult to do so because now the labels have shifted. A lot of what we're trying to do now gets to be labeled as religion. So we're not wanting to indoctrinate people with religion. It has no place. What we are looking at is human behaviors that are constructive. And that's what we're wanting to influence. So we protected that in this 1700 time frame. But in 1764, in the covenant that we made among ourselves as nations in the Turtle Island landmass. So in 1764, after we made treaty among ourselves in the 24 nation agreement, those that were able to attend, the ends of the chain have been left open so that other nations that are resident here on Turtle Island can come in and join. So their interests as Indigenous populations are not lost and cut off. They get to enjoy their interest, protection to the saltwater coasts. So that's what we acted and put into place on to preserve the Information Agreement. Then we sat down to make an agreement with Great Britain, say that we will live in peace and friendship forever. We bind our law, our foundations, our people with you in friendship, in partnership, and allyship. So when my father enlisted into the service in 1939, it was with this understanding. The understanding is when Britain's at war, I'm at war, because I'm their ally. I have made agreement with them about self-preservation. We work together as a family to ensure a mutual survival. And that agreement is what we look to in terms of how we connect with other nations from Europe, coming through the doorway that Britain has created. So those citizens, when they come here, it's with that kind of a protection. You're going to be respected. You're going to be accommodated so that you can make a good life. So our treaties, okay, and our history, our law is not well known. And it's forums like this where we can share with you those ideas about what we have put into place for your benefit and your security. It's amazing that we had that kind of thought that we would have those kinds of ideas, because we were considered to be backward. But we were quite advanced in terms of our social understandings about what makes us human. And that's what I have appreciation for in terms of my mom and dad, thinking that they didn't go to school, but I would say they were extremely well-educated people, because they were able to show me these in simple terms that was easy for me to understand. So when I asked my mom there about did she hate the newcomers because of the way that she was treated, and very quickly she said, no, I don't have any hatred for them. What I have a dislike for is the behavior that they're carrying. But they're showing to me that they have not learned what I consider to be good teaching. So it reminds me, and this is what I speak about on occasion, but people say to them, if you want to take a look at what Canada outside is learning about, then go into the library, you go to the children's section and pull books off the list there, and pull 100 of them out, 100 of the little books, and open them up. Take a look at the stories that they're sharing. And among those stories, is their story there which relates to talking about me in a way which is healthy and constructive? How many are you going to find in the sample, the books off that list? If you're lucky if I'm finding one, maybe today there might be two, maybe more. But the vast majority of that content doesn't speak about me in a way which is healthy and constructive. Many of them just totally disregard that I'm even here. Disregard that I'm even here. So we say the literature that our children are exposed to when they're sleeping at bedtime. What is it in the story that speaks about being in ways which are healthy? It's going to tell me something about what Canada is doing. What is the society actioning? If it's not present, then this is what we're seeking in terms of our curriculum, what's called tuition agreements. We want to see outputs from the school which contributes to the well-being of my child. My child is not being assimilated, but they're respected in being in Anishinaabe. They don't become lost in their own home. Because what I'm doing now is I'm buying curriculum that's designed for my extinction. That's painful. When I speak with the school board, that's what I ask. What are you going to do that's going to be a benefit for both your children, but also mine? So when we think, what did we do? Number three, provide for our security. Because the content is there, but it needs some interpretation from our side to show its presence. So in 1763, the covenant that we made not long ago. I was visiting up at Thunder Bay. I happened to be there at the time, sent by from home to go and participate in the reenactment of the making of Treaty 9. So on our way up to the community gathering site, our bus broke down. We ended up on the side of the road to call another bus from Thunder Bay. And the Governor General and Lieutenant Governor faced the same conditions. They were thinking that the chiefs are going to get angry and they're going to walk away and leave. And we were thinking the same thing. Governor General is going to get frustrated. They're going to run back to Ottawa and Toronto. But both sides hung on and said, this is important. We got to get to the site to participate in this reenactment. And during that time, each of the delegations, each delegate had an opportunity to speak to the Governor General, Lieutenant Governor. And during the time that I was there, I reminded the Governor General, who was Governor General Jean, I said to her, looked into her eyes, the agreement I made with you is inviolable. I may have maintained the right to self-govern. I can create my own government. We didn't give that authority away. And the agreement that we made is that nature, sacrosanct, sacred, cannot be broken. It's under the octable eyes of understanding there's a higher power that is present that witnesses the making of the agreement. She had tears in her eyes. Speaking to her like that. So, thank you for giving me time to come and sit with you. That's important. So in looking at the office of the Governor General, Lieutenant Governor, their presence in the office that they represent is tied to more abstract understanding. There was a letter that was written by Queen Victoria addressed to Chief Eto'o before Confederation. And in the letter, Queen Victoria addresses Chief Eto'o as her brother, saying that the chief is her brother, is acknowledging that this is royal blood. They're equal in nature and standing to the king and queen of Great Britain. And ideas associated with what that's about. So as an Anishinaabe people, and she says in her letter,
when a child is born, that child is my family. So every child that's born is having this kind of equality, being equal to in stature to the king and queen. I'm sovereign in being. So that's very profound in terms of the concept of what it's about. So when we hear Canada say, well, it's on our sovereignty that we take possession of lands in terms of altering boundaries. Oh, it's interesting that you have that, but it's to be exercised only after I'm gone. My people are extinct. Then you have this right to, under rules of discovery, under this law that you're following that was put in place back in 1493, is exercisable. If the land is vacant of human habitation, then as a sovereign, you can claim it and add it to your estates. But if it's not clear of the people, then you can't do that. So when the treaty, we ask those kinds of questions of the Crown. Show me where inside the treaty it says that they give up my right to form my own government. Silent on these items. So in 1978, when we attended those constitution talks, again, I was sent by the community. And I happened to participate in those discussions where the chiefs across Canada assembled in Ottawa. Beautiful ceremony. We had British Columbia delegates come in there with their nice big blankets of shells, walk through the aisles and a lot of nice drum music. Following protocol about the international practices in governance. Putting on a beautiful display culture. I remember sitting there because we had sent a young man to participate in the train. They walked and gathered, came all the way to Ottawa. When the young man guy arrived in Ottawa, I said, don't worry about the costs. We'll take care of you because you're a representative, like a military officer representing our people, taking care of us. So while you're here, there's no burden that you have to fear. We're going to feed you and we're going to house you. Make sure that you get back home safely. So we proceeded to take care of that young man, thanking him for doing that action. So with our community, there's a lot of work that we're having to undertake in terms of how we look after one another, especially in terms of this political work. We're having to define what it's looking like and then put in place steps to produce the outcomes. And that takes us time. So under the child welfare laws, that's part of that requirement when you put together the plan of care. What goes into this plan of care? It should contribute to the well-being of your family, but more to the care of the child in terms of preserving their interests. So we're having to learn about how this is accomplished in this lodge. How is it captured there? We see it in the birch bark stove and we see it inside. Inside of that. Here. Sidestep and bypass. We want to go through. But this one here, from our experience and our observations in our work, we say it has carried us through the centuries of time. And if we pick them up and carry them and handle them over correctly, it will carry us into the future for generations. That's the hope and the faith that we have in that bundle, that it can do that. So these ones, we're having to learn about how to do the work of taking care of them. Because they're easy to throw on the ground, just stomp them. Say that there's nothing there. Just a little illegal feather. But in terms of what it represents, it's not an object, it's a spirit. And we have to learn what that spirit is that we're going to have this one represent. That takes us time. For those youth that are going out to fast in our camps or go out onto our land excursions, they're being introduced to these concepts and we're wanting them to learn through living. I had an example there with youth at home. I asked them to go into the cold water in the spring. And I asked them when they came back, why did I invite you to go into the water just after the ice melted? Why did I want you to do that? Was it because you didn't have a bath for 5 days? You were all filled with body odor and I didn't want to sit beside you? Had much more to do with shocking them. Get them to relate that there's a difference in between them standing on this side of the line and when I go on to the other side. Shock is being able to see the difference in between the two sides. Getting them, introducing them to Anishinaabeg thought, Anishinaabeg understanding. And we can see in them, there's been a shift. Say, great. You're on the way, you're on the good path. You're on the path of our ancestors. The hope is that you're going to learn more to keep yourself on that road. So down there, one of the first things, the law which is made, does it undermine qualities of those grandfathers? 7, 8 qualities. Those qualities are about human behavior. If the law is going to destroy any one of them, we say that's a bad law. It has to be shifted. Because it's going to be damaging when I take it to my community to be followed. We do not want that to occur. We run them through that sieve, that mesh, checking about how it's going to influence grandfather teachings. So that's what has to be incorporated into the plan of care when you're looking after custody of a child. What am I going to do that's going to influence and contribute to the well-being of those grandfathers? If that's going to influence the behavior of the person. And a family that is having to do that work, we have to spend time to teach them, get them to understand in part what we're asking from them in doing that work of care. You have to work with the family to have them appreciate what they are doing, but from using perspectives of the Anishinaabeg side. So this child doesn't become lost in identity. That's complex, difficult. It requires great care in doing that. So that's what slows it down and makes it so difficult to understand and know. But as a manager, you're having to report about the achievement of the results. That's what you take into the court. Speak to the judge. That my work has been conducted. Let's continue to keep the child in care for the time being, but at the same time work with the families back home that are being disrupted. We have to work with them. That's what happened. What the result that we see is that it's been disrupted. family has been disrupted, foundations have been disrupted. We're having to put back into place behaviors that are going to show wellness. From the context of this guide that's been carried by our people for those generations of time. We're having to learn it, we have to know it, how to live with it. It's not a difficult thing, but it does take time to come to know. In science, this one here, put it off of the pause, one of them. Movies, all kinds of movies, music, art forms, all cultural activities. Let's go back to what's going on in that modern world that my children are being exposed to that's going to undermine those grandfather teachers' foundations. Those ones I do not want to hang on my walls at home, the pictures and frames, because when I do these other things, I'm sending my child mixed messages about what is important. What's one of the critical things that we do is the little drawings that they bring from school, put on the fridge, that we praise them for, but we wanted to contribute to these grandfather teachings in terms of their foundations. How is it contained? How is it captured? So I can show it to my child that I'm comprising that. So when we think, quite a listing there of activity that we participate in that is not healthy for us in some forms. You have to be very selective about the movie that I'm going to allow my child to watch, especially at the younger age levels, as they become more aware. And this occurred at about that age 6 and 7 time frame. And you see that, and this is something that I comment on with people to say that when you give a tea set to your young children and they set up that table, where do they place mom and dad around that table? Where do they place friends around that table? The ones that they like the most and treat them the best, they're going to have the seats beside them. So if you're dad and you're sitting on the opposite side of the table over there and say, Dad, we've got to do something about you're being put on the far side because they're telling you, I'm afraid of you. We don't want you to be sitting over there. We want you to be sitting beside mom and dad at the head. So things like that, we have to be somewhat sensitive, but watchful about in terms of how we make assessment and looking at working with people. So in the here, going down this road, fire in the center. We spent a lot of time gathering around that fire, and the purpose has a lot to do with how I'm carrying these ones, protecting them, taking care of them. How am I living them? So when we gather at home as a family around this fire that we light all the time, we joke with one another quite extensively. We laugh at each other, we belittle one another with their little jokes. But we have to be mindful, that's painful. Do that too often, suddenly those people stop coming because of our poking. No, we have to stop them. Have to be certain that when you do that, it's for laughter purposes and not belittling and degrading. So we have those feasts, we have the celebrations, and at times just the spontaneous gifts to say that we love you. We just give you this gift to acknowledge it. Something that's special about who you are that we appreciate. No other reasons, just on the spur of the moment, acting to do that, to say that you're part of the family. So as we're going down, these ones over here. That's what we put in our resolution, 1978, 1980, when we assembled in Ottawa. Royal Proclamation, we issued our own proclamation. Say to Canada, these are the items that you're going to have to include inside that constitution that you are wanting to recreate. We want you to respect that we are nations of people, that we have the right to determine our own citizenship. We have the right to determine who our people are, and we have the right to teach our history. All that must be included inside what we describe as under that Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They have to be supported. So we go back and take a look at the programming that's being delivered through direction from Canada. Is language being supported? In the early years, we'd say no. There's nothing in there which contributes to the maintenance of our languages. So we remind the education people that has to change. That's part of that summary in the reconciliation report. You go down those 87 action items. And in there, you'll see language included as being vital for the well-being of the individual and family community. In terms of the people, we have the right to determine the idea of citizenship, not membership, citizenship. And if we choose to invite you respect our law, we can take in other citizens from other parts of the world. And when they become citizens in our community, they will become Anishinaabe. But they will follow and pick up our law and our teaching. If they can't do that, then maybe citizenship will not be extended to them. So we're going through these kinds of discussions at home and forming a citizenship law. We talk about that one as event on those who belong. What is expected from them and being part and member of the nation. Citizen of the people. So in Canada, when we look at the citizenship code today, it's been altered to say that inside there, when immigrant is taking up citizenship in Canada today, there's a clause that's been put in to talk about upholding and maintenance of the treaties. It's a nice gesture on Canada's part to put that there. But it's taken a long time for our people to get Canada to action that. So Canada is taking steps. But lately, one of the things that we're having trouble with is in that Indian Act section which deals with membership. We're still dealing with this concept of membership. We're saying what the outcome is going to produce. And this is what Sharon Venn from our Sisters of the Treaties from the West cautioned us about. Don't allow Canada to label you as being a minority. It's another term to add on to this list to say that I'm original, I'm Aboriginal, I'm Indigenous, I'm a minority. Still not acknowledging that I'm Anishinaabe. I want you to put into the law that I'm to be respected for being an Anishinaabe. That I have interest in that land, which includes Aboriginal title to the land. That one you will not extinguish, because I will always need a place to call them. So in our treaty, that is what's accommodated when you start taking a look at how the benefits are to be shared. There's a component in it which talks about allotting money to each individual. So each individual can benefit from ideas that when resources like gold are extracted from the land, oil, and all these other commodities, a portion of the money goes back to the Indigenous person so that they can enjoy benefit from that land. Or a portion goes back for maintenance of the ceremony in the community. Paying for the oil or buying gas to keep the fire, or buying food to share with people at the festival times. It doesn't have to be huge quantities, but we want it to be a way which is respectful and healthy. Because that's what kind of living that we were producing for ourselves and having 100% access without kind of restrictions on limitation, be self-managed. So inside, when you look at those qualities, sharing of that land, sharing the benefits. The other part of it, in terms of the treaty, what it says is that allotment will be made for the maintenance of your governance practices. So when you look at education and health, which are the biggest and largest consumers of the budget, those have to be supported. So again, we're having to be extremely selective about the design of that school curriculum and how it's to be delivered. So we don't want to have 100 students in a class, which is kind of a difficult thing for a teacher to try and manage. And it's difficult to have it one-to-one, one teacher for one student. Those are what the kinds of extremes. So trying to find that middle ground in there, which is greater harmony, to say 10 students, 12 students, 18 students per teacher. Those kinds of numbers require some support from kind of research which is undertaken, which would be a good number to look at as a minimum. Minimum thresholds to say that good teaching can occur. So inside, if we're having to consider those kinds of questions in terms of how we look at that treaty, what did our people take into account about what was to be maintained? So we had education systems. We had social support systems within our communities that have been disrupted. One of them had to do with the hunting and fishing. And some of our cases have gone to court. People have gone to court. And when we look at the managing practices, the court has said, if you're going to limit hunting and fishing, you must first prove conservation is necessary. You're having to go and do research about the habitat of the animals, reproduction rates, spatial requirements. If you can clarify those and bring them into the field of understanding, then you can start talking about limitations. Because we want to have them to continue in the capacity of being able to self-regenerate. So things like nursery beds, nursery spaces become important in terms of conservation. There was an interesting discussion on CBC Radio a couple of weeks back addressing that, to say that in the city areas like Toronto, if you've got these big urban centers, are there large spaces of habitation that is accessible to the wildlife, and are there small spaces? It's not necessary to have one huge space. As a matter of fact, it's disadvantaged. It's better that you have these spaces more selectively represented from the wider territory to ensure that there's greater certainty that we're going to capture diversity and then have ways of being able to sustain it by joining the pieces together through pathways of connection. That's something that research has defined to say that this is healthy for a city. Well-being of people to access. But we have to somehow, in our programming, make that known. For the people who are in conservation, the people who are going to contribute that kind of work, the kinds of education that you participate in has to carry these kinds of concepts for you to come to know. So the curriculum, we're always mindful of having to change curriculum. What are we putting in that document that is necessary? We don't want to put items in there which be good taking up time but not doing anything productive. That's not typical, easy to define, very challenging. So when we think about reading, what kinds of actions have been initiated by our people to protect our interests? For those times of them speaking about what is coming, one of the key elements in our 1853. Here. Britain put that section 109 in that British North America Act. And Canada has been trying to alter that one. So when in my being guided, when Confederation first occurred, copies of that document were given to the chiefs in the communities. So that document was given to me to read when I first became chief at the community. I was young, 24 years old, put in the office of being chief. So I was saying it's like in the United States, you put a person in the office of being the president, but they haven't been trained in any way to do that job. But you're expected to function fully. So as a young political man put in this position, I was quite young. And I questioned, said, what am I going to do? The old people said, you have the core that is needed. That's why we have been taking care of you. That's why we contributed to buy lunch for you at school, a collection by the people. They support you so that you could keep on going. To let you know that the people support your attainment of getting to better understand and work with that English language. Because we need that kind of service in our administration offices. They understood that as being needed. And they would bring their letters to me for me to interpret for them because they couldn't read the literature. So I'd read the letter and I'd say, okay, this is what it's asking from you. This is what you should think about in saying. You decide what you want to say, and I will write it for you. So I translated their idea into English for them. And then they were able to put their signature down, write it down and spell it in the way that they're best able, say that it came from them. So I did that kind of work when I was young and going to high school with the result of community. So they supported that, but they were teaching me about these wheels. knowing that it was illegal to do so. It's always the fear that because the Indian Act said you're not to teach the young people traditional customs and practices, it's illegal, they could take you. No restriction. Indian agent can just come in and pick you up and carry you away. And I got sick when I was going to high school. I was absent for a week at school. Indian agent came and criticized my mom and dad. He said, he has to go to school. If he's not in school, and I'm going to take him. Didn't care whether or not I was sick. He has to go back to school. If he doesn't go back, we're going to put him in the reformatory. Threatened with putting me in jail. And when he's put there, he's going to come out with that label of juvenile delinquent, you're a criminal for the rest of your life. You've never committed an offense. That's the kind of pressure that our parents were put under for trying to teach your children. The customs that carried us were criticized by Canada, seeing them being lived by our people. So with our children in going to that day school, part of the reason was to separate us, and it was quite successful. Lost contact with our grandma and grandpa, lost contact with our mom and dad, especially in those relationships required you to go out and live on the land. Harvesting times and seasons. Right now in communities, there's a harvesting of lake trout and whitefish and herring. Well, the time to go and do that was cut short. So you're not able to go out there and follow those practices. So I ended up going out there at midnight. Go there, light a fire on the lake shore with mom and dad and put the net in the water and harvest the fish and come home and get up to go to school. So those kinds of challenges we were having to work around, trying to make sure that the children were learning skills that were going to be helping them to survive in the absence of money. They don't need money, because mom and dad didn't use money, but they were able to harvest from the land resourcing that they needed. Talking to my mom, used to say, there's no time for me to take breaks. I worked all my life. I'm going to have to work until I'm leaving this place. That's okay. I enjoy doing that because I set the pace of how it's to be accomplished. It allows me to go and harvest from the land, but I don't have the kinds of support that I would like at times. That's why I invite you to come help me. So I would be the go guy, go for it. Do a lot of that kind of work with mom and dad. Today I go back and I think I was very blessed to have the time to do that. Because a lot of our young people at home were not able to. So I was out there making maple syrup, harvesting, making baskets, going to make nets, going to make those kinds of activities so that you could harvest from the land. You learn about ideas, which plants can be used for medicine, which kind of plants can be used for food. Some of that quality, that kind of work today, which we're wanting to learn about. And I used to ask them to teach me that, and they were very cautious in saying you have to be extremely careful. Because if you pick the wrong plant and you give it to somebody, they could die. You don't want that to be happening. It takes time, okay, to learn that kind of knowledge, to go out and learn how to turn it into a medicine if required. But learning how to tell the difference between the plants when you see them growing on the ground at the different stages of looks. Harvest them when they're young, harvest them when they're older, they're a little bit different in terms of appearance. Their toxic qualities vary between the two. So leave that to specialists. I don't want to go there because it requires too much time. So in the community, start talking this idea of what's inside that treaty, Bawida, McGowan. That one speaks about what are the promises. What is the nature of the promises that Canada entered into with us that are to be maintained? So in that listing, we look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we go back and take a look at Section 35. Section 35 talks about the existing rights. And we're having to remind Canada, inside the Royal Proclamation, there's a component in here which relates to trade, free trade. And with Mike Mitchell, the chief and activist in Kahnawake, in down at the other reserve at the corner of Ontario and Quebec, Akwesasne. I was at a meeting with him where he was talking about what happened when he went to court. And in the court, he lost his case, sadly, because he was able to prove that we were trading east and west quite openly and freely. But he forgot about the northern part of where he was venturing. He didn't include that. So because he didn't include, he was trading north and south, that's what caused him to fail in his appeal at the court level, at the Supreme Court of Canada. He lost his case about trade because of the north-south absence in trade. But that's where most of the trade was, north and south, but it became so second nature to him, he didn't think of it as being violated in any way.
Make a lot of sense though, the east and west of the seams, it's just one line across.
Yeah.
But we go from east to west, it's like all of them, right? Should be.
It's almost like the total medicine line, the 49 parallel. Everything on the south side, everything on the north side. But the J Treaty, the United States respected, but Canada wants to avoid it. So we're having to remind Canada, and this is where Art Manuel on the West Coast. And I don't know whether or not you followed him and some of the literature that he has, his last book that he was able to put forward before his passing. He talked about the First Nation people are actually subsidizing the resource sales of Canada. The provinces, forestry, mineral, all kinds of activity like that, we got across the border into the United States. So Canada is able to get away with selling prices that are lower quality because they're not funding First Nation people paying for those resources. So he was able to show the link in between the interests, economic interests that are being severed from us by not acknowledging our Aboriginal title. So Canada, in Ontario right now, is trying to take a part of this claim that they're making at an appeal with the ongoing court case to make it difficult for us. Where in Treaty 3 not long ago, the court said to Ontario, when you take a look at the division between Section 91 and Section 92, Ontario gets to manage the land, control of the land. It doesn't include having to share the wealth. Those are responsibilities of the federal government under Section 91. Canada is responsible for the people. So the transfer of the land does not carry any encumbrance. And we're saying, oh, be careful there, because we're challenging Ontario's obligation to meet the requirement of treaty obligation under Section 109. Section 109 talks about the ongoing responsibility and obligation of Canada and the provinces to uphold the content of the treaties, abide by the regulations and the permissions and authorities. Right? So that's threatened. And we're saying to Ontario, you're having to manage the land does not sever the treaty obligations, because you cannot sever the treaty obligations because it's outside of your authority. So in 1980, when we went to Britain to speak with the House of Commons there, and we wanted to have an audience with the Queen, and the Queen said, well, it's not the appropriate time or place that we should be talking. It's better that you talk with the House of Lords, who oversee the implementation and following of the law. So our delegation met with the House of Lords, and the House of Lords, through their key spokesperson, said to our delegation, we're not going to open the treaty, and we're not going to allow that will alter the treaty. And it's for you, it's your responsibility to bring forward the claims. If you feel the treaty is being violated, then you have the obligation and right to say no to any of the law that Canada is going to bring forward that's going to alter those outcomes. But you have to stand up and defend them. So when we look at the part of the treaty which talks about in this earlier letter that I referenced in part, about Queen Victoria talking to Chief Dalkeith, part of that was challenged and brought forward in Alberta not too long ago. And this is where Pat King references in one of the videos that was made by him, trying to approach Canada. But the elder from Alberta walked into court to challenge the way the oil companies were mistreating her. So she launched a claim against the oil companies for this kind of a negligence and bad treatment. So she used that letter from Queen Victoria to Chief Dalkeith as a defense, because it doesn't speak only to Chief Dalkeith. It says any First Nation person that's born and is coming from this bloodline, blood tie, is having these rights. So she took her letter into the court and she says, I don't have money to pay for lawyers. But one of the things this letter here I'm talking about says that you're my judge. Because inside the letter it says, as a child born, I'm sister to the Queen. So you can't charge me. As a matter of fact, your obligation is to maintain me. So the judge looked at that letter and said, I'm going to have to take some time to review this letter more closely. So she, the recess was called. And then it took some couple of hours. Then after lunch, the judge came back into the court and said, I'm going to have to halt the proceeding because this woman's rights are being violated. This case should never have been brought into the court. So Grandma out there was feeling quite happy. That letter, I was aware of it, but I didn't know that it was real. So I decided that I should use it to see whether or not it was having some validation. And I'm finding out that it is. It's law. So I saw that letter and I said, oh, that's the same letter that I handed out to our students when I was a professor over at Cambridge teaching child welfare law. So there's a document here that has been shared with me by the community and we have been keeping. I would like you to have a copy of it. And wherever you go and travel, try to find out the original tie that comes from Britain, from Queen Victoria to our people. And we found out that there's a copy, it's like a duplicate, down in New York City in the archives of the United States. Because that's where the grandma from West was able to access it. And she was able to get an archivist, a historical archivist, to do the work and the search. And to go and get the document, you can't just be a normal person from the street. You have to be coming from First Nation community whose rights are being mentioned in that document. And then there's a pathway of validation that you're having to walk through to get that access. And a copy was made for her with all the stamping to send it back to her to say that this is legitimate. Same thing you have to do with the own, I guess, in your doctoral studies. Go back to the library, validate that these are legitimate and they're real, that they're not fabrications in any way. But there's a trail there that you have to provide certainty about in terms of the documents. They're legitimate. They're legally in terms of being able to take them to the court. So in terms of the grandma being able to do that, she was able to get the case taken out of court, and she won. So she didn't have to go there to go through the expense of paying lawyers to say to Alberta has to change the way that it's providing for their care as being inheritance rights to benefit from the use of the resources. So our chiefs here in the treaty territory of the Anishinaabe and the province of Huron, we have the same kind of protections. So I'm saying to the chiefs, go and get copy of that letter from Queen Victoria. Because in that letter, it's under the umbrella that we look at where the Governor General questioned at times the rationale for that officer to exist. And it has much to do with if the Canadian Parliament collapsed, if the Ontario Parliament collapsed, there would still be an official that has legitimacy to provide and look after governance. Somebody to manage the military, somebody to manage the public service. So from time to time, when Parliament doesn't pass the budget during that time of year after March, when the new budget is brought forward, and they have to run it through House of Commons for approval, and before they go into summer recess, they don't often pass the budget. They'll wait till September and October. But during that time when there's no budget, monies have to be paid to the keeping act of the civil service. So it's at that time the Governor General issues warrants. I will give you permission to spend money against the public purse of Canada for the maintenance of the public service or some other associated kind of reasoning. So it's the warrant being law, which is important to acknowledge there. So the letter from Queen Victoria to Chief Petahtegoose is under that same kind of an umbrella. The Queen, as head of state, is able to do this kind of action, which is going into that realm of having absolute authority. What I say as king or as queen is law. There's a continuation there of a recognition of that kind of a power. That's what is inside this letter. So that in part is why they don't want it to be broadly known. So the chiefs from Alberta in Treaty 8 questioned whether or not it was valid. So they sent a bill to the House of Commons in Great Britain, not Canada. They said, there's a bill you're due from the Crown that's payable. I forget what it was. It might be for gas or something like that, some discretionary kind of items of the budget. They sent that to Britain and they thought it would just be totally ignored and lost. So within 2 weeks, it came back paid for in full. Queen of England. So there's inside the document, it actually being taken by a First Nation, holding to account the agreement of that treaty, because it's an extension of the treaty that is covered inside that kind of a warrant, and it's valid. It's law. It may have been issued before Confederation, but that Section 109 is all agreements that Canada has made. It's going to be coming after Confederation still will be honored and respected. It was tested by that treaty from Treaty 8, chief in the community. So that was brought home by the lawyer that we have working with us, bringing that to our attention to say that we've got a good foundation and we've done a good homework, and we're probably going to get a good result from our claim that we now have before the court about the alteration of our boundaries. And it probably for Ontario, it's making them more cautious about how they work with us as partners in Confederation. So when we deal with Ontario now, we were, again, in the past couple of weeks, we dealt with the local ministry here, mines from across the road. Ministry of Natural Resources, the Forestry Division, the Mining Division, the Environmental Division, all came to the community to sit down with us, and we were talking about what they call the arsenic spill from the mine down at Long Lake. So all these senior directors came to the meeting. So we didn't ask for them, but they showed up. So we're sitting down and wondering about why they were here. So, oh, it's probably because this letter is circling through the bureaucracy. And they're finding out that Canada has obligation under treaty to work more closely with the Indigenous communities to resolve some of the questions. So more attention is paid by Ontario about the use of the land and the resources. So those treaties have real authority. But it's necessary for our chiefs to be learned about their contents and how to apply it. So last week when I was talking with the chiefs, I mentioned these to them. That's agreement that we made among ourselves is important for our people to come to know. So if your community has a treaty, then look inside what the content is that protects, what is it that the treaty protects for you. Those items which are silent are still all intact. But more importantly, for the chiefs where no treaty exists, Canada has obligation to go over there and make a treaty with you. Otherwise, they have no authority to step onto your land they're trespassing, police, military people, government officials, nobody is becoming trespassing on your land. So so when I wrote that kind of a letter out to the chiefs of the hereditary chiefs in British Columbia, that's the one that I mentioned about that. That's one that got stricken from the circulation. So I said, that's okay. I'll write a second letter, or maybe I'll go and visit with them to talk with them about what we're doing here, how it's being influenced by what they're doing out west. And that's one thing that's good about the First Nation people. They're really work closely together to defend each other's interests and rights because we're all of the same family. Take care of each other as individuals. Something that's, for me, I take great interest in and great pride in that we're able to do that. So I've talked a lot for the last 20 hours, an hour, 2 hours. We got specific kinds of questions that you wanted to have spoken about that you may have interest in.
By us. I mean, you provided us with a lot of information for treaties and, possibly loopholes, possible solutions going forward. I think what was very interesting is when we talked about the justice piece there. This is a social class, and it's the helping relationship. And I think that's really important to understand the treaty relationships that we have with Canada. What I found very interesting was that you mentioned something about Canada not meeting those 4 obligations there and not being a sovereign nation, but maybe a nation state, under the Queen. The Commonwealth of this. And I think when we look at what's happened to people here, those treaties really, I don't think a lot of people understand them. I don't think that a lot of people understand the significance of the treaties or what power the treaties have. And I think when we got down to this one, when we talked about the grandfather teachings and added the 8th teaching in there. Those are really important teachings that we need to focus on when we work with people. And I guess how do we use the treaties to protect that? Maybe something that's helpful for students to go and understand. I know it's important to know how we got to where we are today. But if there's a way forward from here, how do we move forward knowing that there are items in the treaty that are protecting us as Indigenous peoples of this land? How do we use those to our advantage? I think that would be a really good question for students to know and understand.
Back in 1969, during that time when that white paper was being unrolled across Canada by the Department of Indian Affairs, there was another gathering that was being held over in Europe, where they talked about what treaties are. And in the outcome from those from that work, they came to these kinds of conclusions that these treaties are the international standard and method that is used by that international community to hold people to account. So Canada, in trying to negate the treaty, putting them in terms of a lesser order of importance, was shut out from doing that. And they said treaties are legal documents. enforceable between nations. So we are able to go to the international community, the international court, and hold Canada to account. And that's what we did in 2017. And then this year, Canada is again having to go there to do an accounting because 5 years has elapsed since that last challenge that Canada was put to by Great Britain. So Canada is still being asked. In terms of the resources, please show us the documents where you are making commitment to share the wealth of the resources. We want to see those, what you are doing, because it's part of the human rights requirements in terms of how you manage the Indigenous peoples of your lands. So Canada has been shy because they have not been able to show that they're sharing in the resources. And Great Britain is asking them. There's treaty obligations that I made. Section 109 that I put, and now you're putting it in that section 35, the Constitution. But as it goes through there, you see it not even being mentioned as under section 35, but it calls it an existing right. So it's the onus is on you to prove that it has continued. And that makes it difficult for you to undertake because you need assistance from lawyers from time to time to do some of this legal writing and legal researching. So, well, those are all obligations. That's what that Queen Victoria letter speaks to. If you have to go to court, it will be done at my expense. So Canada has an obligation to fund the resourcing of having to provide those services to you. So that's part of the understanding that our people need to come to know. The court is there to protect you. And the court protects you the way that protects Canada in terms of being a crown or Ontario, being a province of the crown. The expenses of the state are put at your convenience so that you can protect those interests. And that's what that Queen Victoria letter addresses. That's an obligation, it's a crown in their relationship with you, because they're benefiting from the use of the land and the resources without at times sharing equitably with you or with us. So we remind Canada that these are legal obligations, they're legal duties, or duties of responsibility. So in here, this time is population, this copy that we do, there's a requirement of having to make a treaty to take care of them, those interests. But in the treaty, you're going to have obligation to write them down more explicitly. Others, because that's what the standard is today. They want to see greater clarity about that expression. That's for you to prepare. What do you want from the treaty? And when it's not presented in there, you have to make that known. So that's why I say when I sit with Canada in Ontario, before I sit down with you, I want you to put a copy of the treaty on the table. And that's what Dean Sayers did when he was out cutting trees adjacent to the community and selling them to make money so that he can provide for some of the funding and programming at the community. So he says, he asked them, please show me in the treaty and please show me where you get the authority from to stop me. Because those trees are mine. I have their Aboriginal title in them. I want to see how you got authority to take that away from me. And the court was never opened to face the challenge. It just said, Dean, go out and cut your trees. He has. So that's the same kind of a message I say to our community members. If you want to hunt, then go out into those areas where the animals are living. You can harvest some of those. When you go out there, when you put up your tent, put your name on that tent. identify who you are and say, I come from a Tikmekshing and I'm exercising my right to hunt and fish over the territory of the treaty space. And in that treaty space, we have to remind them about the 1764 covenant. My interests don't stop at the treaty boundary that's of the high water mark. I can go beyond that treaty definition of what's included under the treaty, but my Aboriginal interests can go to the saltwater coasts. And that's what that letter from Queen Victoria acknowledges. Anywhere in the nation that animal travels, you are free to go and take it to put food on your table. So that kind of a acknowledgement by the Queen is also related to some of the court cases out in the prairie provinces where people were going into the provincial parks to hunt. And in those cases, again, the federal government of Canada and provincial governments in the provinces were told those are crown lands. But the Indigenous people who are adjacent to those territories have the inheritance rights to go and continue to hunt and use those animals to provide food for their people, or to use the resources to cut food or to cut trees to create heat so that you can survive the winter weather more comfortably. You can go there and you can use some of the trees to build your wigwam lodges so that you can have ceremony. So those kinds of interests in the crown space of the Ontario and the provinces are trying to manage is open to First Nation people to access. And that's what treaty speaks about in terms of when they start to be cut short, cut away from being able to have having the access, then there's a compensation that the government is going to provide to you for that expense. And that's what Ontario right now has been showing us. They now have a department that never used to exist, which talks about Indian affairs and relationships with the First Nations communities. First time in Ontario, you see that kind of office emerging. And it says, your obligation is to go and find a way to work with those communities so that they're not going to be cut off from their inheritance rights. So the provinces has to open up the purse a little bit to provide assistance to our communities. So when we look at the obligations under the what they call child welfare law, that's what Cindy has been able to, in part, make more visible under the Human Rights Challenge, and then to Cindy Blackstock, and then the what do you call it, the child welfare principle there, fighting for the ones that are disadvantaged. So that's a high cost, and that's you look at $1.5 million, $2 million to provide for the care of one child. That's high need. That is an expense. So the province really has to look at the delivery of services, and for the accounting of taking away from communities all these responsibilities that they were earlier managing at lesser cost, helping them to provide for the maintenance of these young children because they become victim to alcohol.
Do you have any comments or questions for Art? Because I will ask you. Are all the treaties the same? I'm from Wiki, and I know Wiki is unseated. Because they didn't sign it. So I was trying to figure out which treaty did they not sign, so I was trying to, figure that out, and even the timeline. So Bondhead treaty was first. And then the Google. And it's my understanding that Wiki did not sign the 1862 Google treaty. But other First Nations on Manitoulin did.
So I know there's some differences, but I'm just wondering. The, Robinson Huron tree that's happening now, that's all First Nations? within the
All
First Nations?
these, all the signatory partners.
Okay.
And then with Comicon, because there are people that are signatory partners that have married into the community are also going to be part, like beneficiaries. But in terms of total, Comicon is approaching. It's the understanding of what the 1764 agreement produced. 1764, the Silver Covenant. Silver Covenant says my interest, even though I don't have a treaty, will be provided for about my Aboriginal titles, my inheritances. So when I get cut off from all those benefits, there's a compensation. And that's what Comicon is able to enjoy. Go after Canada and Ontario so that your people are deprived from hunting, deprived from being able to use the resources. There's a compensation that also is due to you for those kinds of shortcomings, that kind of a cutoff of your people. So we're saying to them, go and tell Ontario, go and tell Canada, you're benefiting from the resources that are owned by me as under inheritance rights. I'm being deprived just like the treaty partners. And I'm entitled to in-kind treatment. But Comicon also has openness that other First Nations don't have. And I, in giving guidance to some of the community members, I say to them, go and get a letter from the chief to say that you're a citizen of a Comicon, you're a member of a Comicon, and that I have entitlement to go onto the land in the way that the treaty partners are, but that I'm not to be cut off from health benefits, education benefits that are being distributed to other communities. And in part, that's why the Comicon is funded in the same way that the other First Nations are. There's no line item which says that there are limits. It talks more about the need of the community. So in our treaty, where it talks about the funding of the governance, we ask them, where does the limitation lie? Because it doesn't talk about putting limit on what kind of governance you're going to provide. There's an obligation on you to pick up some of that cost. So in working with Canada, we go to that treaty to say that treaty is silent here. So that leaves the door open for me to go. If I want to go and open up a mine, I'm able to go there and do that. You may not like it, but under inheritance rights, I'm able to open a mine, sell the gold, sell the silver, whatever is there. And if I form a group around me to develop a company to do that, then I'm able to. Because then in the proclamation, that's what it speaks in part about. And the Queen Victoria letter says, if anyone wants to come onto the land and use the resources, they must first come and get permit from you. So they should be coming to the Comicon for the permission. And they haven't done that, especially for a valley here, opening up this big nickel mine. And the other mining companies around. My interest goes up there because I have not signed a treaty. So we have an obligation to share in the wealth that's being generated with my home community and our people. So that's the kind of language that you have to speak from in becoming a legal citizen at Comicon. Those ancestral ties have not been broken, and this is what has been protected in the covenant. Your Aboriginal interests will continue on into Confederation and on into Anishinaabe. As long as the sun shines and continues to, water continues to flow in the rivers in a healthy, which is good for our peoples, we will have this living arrangement to share.
Other comments or thoughts? have a question. We will talk to you. This is your expert here. And I'm sure you will see the questions that are posted, and not just the one that ask the question. He's ready to answer. If you don't have a question or a comment, I would like for you to maybe just that I know something that you can do. We're going to have a process to put it back in the sense. A couple of words.
No idea what that sounds like. I'm going to think about it. Just like really change the perspective of all of the conversations going on.
I'm from student community, my like it was the first pre started with the Brilliant, but
There's an interesting outcome from Treaty 3. In the early years when Treaty 3 people challenged Ontario about its cutting of timber on the lands. In the court case back in that 1873 timeframe, this is just shortly after Confederation, they had to go to Britain to get a judgment. And at that time, they were still strongly attached to that doctrine of discovery thinking, where we were not legitimate in terms of being people. So we use those kinds of strange words. We have a usufructuary right in the land, saying that we can go out and use it, but it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the Crown because they have made declaration and taken ownership through making declaration. But citing that doctrine of discovery thinking, because that was picked up and made to be law in the international community. So we have been challenging that one ever since that kind of thinking has been brought here. They're saying, I'm sorry, but you are violating rights of humanity. And in the case that was brought during the after the Second World War time, where they were wanting to hold the Nazis to account for all their infractions in causing the Second World War to to be fought. They wanted to hold the officials that were supporting Hitler to account for that behavior. So they had to look at what is a court that we can go to, that we would consider to be a competent court. Competent court meaning that there's some jurisdiction, there's some body that is looking at the principles of law that are going to be raised and are being violated by the Nazis. So they looked at where is this court? So they had to open up a new court called the World Court. And it was in that World Court by the action of the international community where he started looking at the concept of treaty. How are we going to relate with one another? And it's from that outcome where the international community in 1969, and I think it was 1987, 1989, where they gave legitimacy by sanctioning to say that treaties are enforceable international agreements, and it's the way the international community conducts business. And it's through that process we can hold a court of the International Foundation to hold people to account. So in that area around this idea of inheritance right, that's where the charter of the UNRIP has emerged from. Our people have been going down there to do some of that lead work. And one of our principal partners in doing that has been Sharon Venn, like the lead counsel for the treaty committees out west. And then Onion Lake from the west also going to Geneva to bring Canada to appear before that international forum and challenging them about show us the agreements where you agreed to share the resources of those lands. And Canada not showing them. This is why, in part, you're seeing Canada now make these political announcements. Out in British Columbia, we are, I forget what the number is, we have formed a bank that can be borrowed, where money can be borrowed from, for the resource developments projects that are occurring within First Nation communities. We put up a fund there, so I think it was $800 million or $500 million to one of those kinds of numbers. Say that when they go back there, they can say to the tribunal, we have created a bank for the First Nation people to have access to monies so they can develop the resources independently. So they're making packages like that, but they're still not wanting to acknowledge ideas around you have full title to those lands. And that's what we're wanting, and that's what we're bringing forward through the claims process. And that's what Britain said to our delegations. You have to stand up, and for that law that you disagree with, you have the right to say no, that it will not be applied to you. So for our people, this is what you're having to consider. Are you saying that you're a citizen of Canada? For me, I say no. When it comes to enumeration time, that's where there's an accounting there of the population of Canada, citizenship, what you call that, enumeration, the census document. I crossed that little X there where it talks about Canadian being a Canadian citizen, and I put a line through it, and I write beside it, my relationship with Canada is defined by treaty. So there was an official that saw that document, and they wanted to change it. They tried to take my X out and then put my name in and cross Canadian citizenship and put my name beside. And my signing of the documents, I submitted that as my response. They were told, I was told, I'm sorry, this is a legal instrument. You have no right to alter my response. The way I crossed out the X and put my signature, that has to be reported by Canada and taken into account. So I go back and ask them, where is the record, my record showing up about my declaration that I'm not a citizen? So that becomes important to assert that, where you say, you're saying no to Canada about the legislation that it's producing. Because when you become a citizen, you're saying that I agree that the representatives who are going to speak politically that are elected are going to include me in their coverage, about speaking for me. But when they do that, they're making declarations that I'm a citizen. They're not speaking for me as a tree department. And that has to be made clear in terms of where they're speaking from, and who they are. So when they get to Canada and say, if I'm a citizen, then I'm saying to Canada, you have the right to make that law, and you have the right to order me to follow it. And again, I say, sorry, Canada, you cannot take away from me my inheritance rights as being Anishinaabe. If you're going to do that, it has to be done through the making of treaty, not by your fabricating law in the House of Commons in Ontario or Canada or any other legislature. It's for me to exercise and protect. And it's through the treaty process that I do that. So that kind of a pathway, you have to be knowing that. And that's what Great Britain said. You have to say no. And you have to be able to provide an alternative that you know your people protected and acted on in doing that work. So we go back to the reference points. 1764, we sat down with Great Britain. We made a covenant with them, giving them permission to come and set up their government here. It's at my pleasure that they have the offices opened. I'm not accountable to them, they're accountable to me. And that's what we're holding people to do. So I went to Ottawa at one time with my good friend Annie Ricard, and Ricard Ba now. And we were sitting there with the Director General. And we were asking him for some money about education services. And he was saying to us, we don't have any extra money. And Andy Ricard looks into his eyes and says, that's an outright lie. I want you to take a look outside in the city of Ottawa. I want you to take a look at all those concrete buildings, all that glass, all that infrastructure. How come those buildings can be built? You're telling me there's no money for my children at home to go to school. These companies, these corporations build these huge, fantastic, nice-looking buildings. And I can't put a little school in my community. You want me to put up a little trailer? You're giving these people permission to write those off as tax, untaxable. There's something wrong with that picture in terms of how you're looking at revenue sharing. You're giving greater protection and benefit to those corporations than you are to our innocent people at home. And that poor man looking at us, put his head down and tears in his eyes. Didn't have a response. We said to him, we want you to find some money to help that community. You know, I'll do it. So it's not a nice place to go and search for those kinds of responses at times because it becomes expensive. If you're not having money as source of revenue to draw from to pay for your cost of going into Ottawa, pay for the gas in your vehicle, and then having to stay overnight because your meetings are scheduled at the late hours of the day when you're unable to leave, and things, all kinds of lots of it on you to delay you and try to remove you without it coming forward with your actions. Another time I was traveling with the chiefs, and we were going to Ottawa to meet with the Minister of Indian Affairs. So we all, the chiefs and a busload of us from the North Shore here, went into the House of Commons. And we all sat down in the hallway. It's like students down at McGill, there was a St. George, and under protest. I have no place to sleep. I don't have any hotels. I'm going to sleep here in the hallway. If it's going to be uncomfortable, you shouldn't be doing that. But I don't have any other choice. So we all sat down there and used the cushion in our little luggage to make some gestures about going to sleep. And we knew the minister was in his office. So he comes to the door. He says, "I'm sorry that the staff has not been honest with you. I am here." I said, "We knew you were here. We just wanted to sit down and talk with you about our expenses that we're having to look at in our communities. And we would like you to fight for an increase of the budget that we're able to access." And through there, working with him and then going to Ontario and meeting with Premier Davis at that time. And I was asked to go up and do speaking for the chiefs. I was able to. And we asked that Ontario's budget, we have 22% of the First Nation population. We should get 22% of the budget. And we asked the political parties of Ontario to support that thinking. So the political parties of Ontario all supported our request. So at Ottawa, we got 22% of the budget, where before we were only getting 17. We increased our budget by 5%. And that really contributed to our communities getting better access to some of the housing that was going to be provided with some of these additional resources. So we have had some success in being able to work with the politicians. But sometimes it's not an easy thing to do. You really have to be grounded in doing your homework to get your facts clear that you're going to work from. Like these here, these are real legitimate outcomes that we have put into place for our well-being as nations. More Canada to count to them, to us, when we go into that international forum. We've been successful there. That human mind or that human presence that you work from is acknowledged at the United Nations. The global community responds as they with questions globally. How do we work with one another as peoples, nations? And we want to see that idea of strong morals, good ethics. Those kinds of foundations, okay, we want to see being put into the ideas of good law, protected in solid law. So UNDRIP is part of that. So inside you look at UNDRIP. And in my community back home, when UNDRIP wasn't signed by Prime Minister Harper of the day, I said to him, "You had a good chance, Mr. Prime Minister, to show some leadership in doing the work and working protecting First Nation peoples, Indigenous nations of the globe." So what's important for me is that I understand that. And the only permission that I really truly need is for me to sit around the council table at home with our community. Because we have that kind of a humanity about us, that we are able to organize to form government. We are able to organize to address our interests and concerns. And I put that into my document, and I take that one forward into the international community or into the province of Ontario governments in Canada. Say these are actionable items which are protected under treaty, and Canada has to respond to them. You can't just come out and say, no, it's not adequate. So there are pathways that are open to you to pursue. So at home, so this is a lot of the homework that communities have to uptake. Develop those capacities to do that kind of work. So some communities have difficulty because we can't have the staff, we don't have the people that we can turn to. So I'm a rare person. Hopefully that'll help you too. But it was Fred Kelly from Treaty 3 back in 1980 that backed my story up when I spoke at the big forum of the Assembly, first time in Canada. He said, we've got to go to England. We've got to take treaty, put it on the table to be its central argument. Canada and provinces were all fighting against us to stop us. He said, well, you're not this. It's not your signature on the treaty. It's the signature of Great Britain. So that's where we have to go to address our shortcomings. And the House of Lords welcomed us. And they said, yes. And we're not going to alter the treaty. Section 109 says Canada has obligation to comply with it. Okay. We're not going to open the treaty. We're not going to alter the treaty. The treaty will stand as is in its form. Any new treaty, Canada has to make under the auspices of its frameworks. So out west, Canada has to go and sit with British Columbia to form treaties about accessing the land. That's the requirement of law. Canada can't change that, and we have to point that out as Indigenous people. We hold Canada to account to say that Royal Proclamation law is still valid. It's a requirement that you have to follow. So when you go to existing Section 35 demonstration, go back to Royal Proclamation because it says this is what you are required to follow. There's no choice. So it's a nice foot to stand on when you go and sit down with Canada to point that out. They can't ignore you.
I guess it's time to go early. I'd like to thank you, Art, for sharing your knowledge with the class too. I'm sure there's probably other questions that they'll have coming up, and I know we're going to continue discussion next week in our class. But I think there's a lot that can be done with knowing information about the treaties. And, maybe this is thinking outside the box that we need to think differently about how you approach working with your communities, and this could be a really good tool to know to be helpful. And, sometimes when we do social work, we think very generally about working one-on-one with people, but we're working with communities. What some people think about. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
It's for me, it's been a life a while at work. Trying to make sure that this kind of information doesn't become lost. That I'm taking it and handing it over to. Right now, my son is my principal student.
He's lucky to have you.
And my granddaughter, she's going to school up at Algoma right now in biology. I sit with them around the fire and talk about how are you going to protect those nice benefits that you enjoy in being an Aboriginal person. Greater freedoms that other Canadians right now don't have access to and enjoy. But the intention is that it will be there. You got